recording. All right, welcome to our third education session in our AR/VR challenge. Tonight we have a really interesting presentation on building, safe and inclusive digital spaces by April Boyd. April, I'm not even going to attempt your last name.
Oh, right. Boyd Nerona.
Nerona. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll turn it over to April, and hopefully we'll have. Oh, and I saw Chen just joined us too. Welcome, Chen. So,
April, well, hello everyone. All righty, I'm so excited to be here. I've had a bit of a dialogue with some of you all, and Jim and I have been ongoing dialogue. So we're both excited to have this night here. I will be speaking on building safe and inclusive digital spaces and an experience as well. And that is my expertise as trying to navigate here. Next. There we are, as the president of the CyberXr Coalition. And in that role, I lead a global team in addressing and helping shift the mindset of private stakeholders in the XR and the cybersecurity ecosystems. And those partners and collaborators range from big tech and Silicon Valley to local companies and academia in various communities. In addition to that role, the CyberXr Coalition is under the umbrella of the XR Safety Initiative. And I serve as a global D&I advisor, diversity and inclusion advisor, and a board member of XR-SI. So I actively partner, such as tonight, with allies and peers and corporate suite executives, where we help build safe, immersive environments and create lasting collaborations. Equally important is we also provide industry-wide standards on human-centric operability, privacy, safety, security. So I, furthermore, in this role, encourage global policy coordination, and collaborative efforts that help foster just a healthy research ecosystem that, in a sense, addresses that digital talent gap and also facilitates a sense of belonging for aspiring XR technologists. Last but not least, I also am a professor of cybersecurity at the University of St. Mary, which is in Leavenworth, Kansas. So as I mentioned, the CyberXr Coalition takes a global perspective that focuses on addressing the need for diversity and inclusion in emerging technologies across the board, spatial technology, spatial computing, where we are there at the forefront to make sure and ensure that these environments, these products, and the processes are inclusive and diverse. And also, we position ourselves to make sure that we look at even unintended consequences that evolve or occur during this rapid adoption of various domains and ecosystems. So our expert ensemble of advisors in the coalition include global thought leaders, industry established influencers, and world-renowned experts. So as you can see, we at the CyberXr Coalition are uniquely positioned to not only watch and assess, but set specific targets and implement policies to reshape the mindset towards diverse and inclusive companies and communities worldwide. Even more, to kind of give you a better position or perspective of that, we have like InfoSec girls that range from India. Equal Entry reigns from Tokyo. One of our other founding members, Gamer Safer, is in California. OWASP is a national organization. Open AR Cloud is from Germany. So when we talk about presenting and really coming from a global perspective, we literally do that. So even though digital experiences may look different for every company and industry, or even a new emerging sector of innovation, essentially the future of work starts at the intersection, we believe, of 4 distinct rules of engagement. And those include accessibility, diversity and inclusion, ethics and awareness, and trust and safety. Now, those were 4 pillars that when we launched our initial industry-wide standards, a guide, those are four pillars that we introduced. We thought that those should be integral components that we initially launched and focused on an industry-wide perspective. So our guide, as you can see here, focused on providing best practices, adoption-ready processes. We were very intentional with that. So if you read through these, we gave you top 10 tips and things of that sort. So if you download it, you are ready to apply it day one. Our guide also helps businesses reimagine what this new normal will look like. And then last but not least, it will help businesses, entities, companies, schools better leverage digital transformations as a whole. So we kind of think from this perspective as a quote that as many companies grapple with the unprecedented circumstances evolving or surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, it also presents an opportune time to actively address this human side of operational excellence in today's workplaces and virtual environments. Many businesses are faced with introducing new standards, strategic policies, and abiding by the government mandates. So in this quest to operate and deliver the best value to customers, whether that's students or other corporations or suppliers, at the very core of this cultural shift, we at the CyberXr Coalition believe that it must be human-centered design. So when we talk about this human-centric design being the new normal of interoperability, it's about achieving this human-centric design that's based on two essential components. The first is the development of baseline practices to enable organizations, the developers, the content creators, all these XR stakeholders, to enable them to make ethics and inclusion-based decisions to build this ecosystem of immersive technology. And as you can see here, we introduced in our standards this TIA triad for human-centric design, where this the trust component, where there is this accessibility component, and an inclusion component, all three in one. So this human-centric design is the new normal, right? And a second component is the development of voluntary, very crucial, voluntary consensus-driven XR standards, policies, and guidelines. Once again, this enables this ecosystem, this XR ecosystem, to make pragmatic and impact-driven, because we want to make an impact for these decisions to help create and help this human-centric design evolve within the development of these new ecosystems. So successfully implementing this novel industry-wide standards and processes, we thought and presented 5 crucial overarching goals within this process of this immersive tech standards. One was to leave no one behind. We know that it is crucial for all to participate in this digital society, however and whatever it's going to look like as it is ongoing and evolving. 2, that it must be accessible. 3, to protect the identities. When people participate, the privacy has to be, this protection has to be baked within the framework. And, it's regardless of a user's gender, ethnicity, birthplace, anything that may mitigate discrimination and bias must be considered within building this evolving tech standards and immersive technology. 4, security. We must keep everyone safe and secure in this immersive environment, from the moderators, from the users, from both perspectives. That security framework has to be involved. And then last but not least, we must build new rules to promote trust. Now that sounds simple. It sounds like, yeah, duh, that should be a given, but many times, it is not. So we also focus on this innovative governance mechanisms to complement traditional policy and regulation. And we understand it is an ongoing process. So as a baseline for immersive technologies, the CyberXr Coalition outlines the 10 priorities for VR and AR regarding accessibility, but we focused on 4 initially in our guide that we launched last year. So when we look at accessibility, we know that it's not just about making sure that you meet any legal requirements, that you check the box for some feel good PR opportunity. But when we think about accessibility, it is about having good hardware and software design from the beginning. It is about development and coding along the way. Accessibility is about appropriate testing and training, and overall building a culture of care. There was a cohort of ours that, as I mentioned, Equal Entry is based out of Japan. And Thomas is just constantly focused on accessibility for any and every type of experience within XR, whether it's a disability component, whether it's users being colorblind, but simple things like that tend to over and over again not be infused within that development process. So what is the benefit? It decreases the likelihood of mistakes and re-engineering designing of these frameworks. So if we even look at it from a business perspective, not even from a human-centric, but even from a business perspective, who would not want to have to start back at square one? That's money, time, and resources that had accessibility been baked within the framework from the initial onset, that would have saved, money, time, and resources to have focused more so on other phases of design. Now, second component that we talked about in our framework was diversity and inclusion. And as a nation, as it's worldwide, we are at a crossroads between emerging technologies, data sciences, and cybersecurity. And this is fueled by a renewed global necessity of D&I in each of these domains. So extended reality should reflect the real society. Now we know that exclusion and racism, sexism, all the isms, that they don't end when someone from a marginalized population enters XR or a digital realm. And I was serving on one panel, I think it was an accessibility panel, and an audience member asked, does racism exist in XR? And it does. Case in point, one of my fellow panelists had stated that when she enters a digital realm, she doesn't participate, or her avatar does not reflect who she is in the real world. And at first it was a little bit odd to me, but then as she began to explain that decreases a lot of the barriers or the isms that she oftentimes experiences when she is in XR. So her avatar is purple with crazy hair and things of that sort, but does that really create a sense of belonging if that's how we have to present ourselves as an avatar in digital realms? And that's a real concern, especially for marginalized populations. So what is the benefit? If diversity and inclusion is introduced and implemented with a great thought of care, then that it increases a heightened level of standards for all of the community members to participate in fully. You have the moderators and you have the code of conduct, but if that is baked with, if diversity and inclusion at the forefront is baked within the frameworks, that will create a heightened level of standards for all of the community members in that room or that experience. And also, the social community will run more smoothly. And we've seen this happen as the participants agree to abide by those ethical standards, respective rules, and the already prescribed protocols that have been outlined. A third component that we focused on in our standards guide that we launched last year is we know that we are shaping the future for a possible outcome for defining what digital ethics means. So we address this challenge where we face today while building an awareness and preparing industry and society. Once again, it is an ongoing process. No one can do it by themselves, but we know as a coalition through our collaborative efforts, our global collaborative efforts, that we are chipping away at it and establishing, as I mentioned, this digital ethics perspective. So we consider things like, what changes will emerging technology have on our minds and bodies? We were talking earlier before here about, the glasses and what are they monitoring, and where's that privacy and security perspectives get baked into the framework as well from an ethical perspective. We also looked at what effect will it have on our relationships with each other? We are seeing this actual fusion between machines and man. So what will that look like? And how will that further morph or evolve the state of the environment? All of these components must have incorporated an awareness of that what if, or what these changes or effects will be. And then looking at it and creating an approach to a system-wide, industry-wide ethical filter throughout this whole digital transformation process. So as you can see, it's an ongoing process, but it must be addressed. And then a fourth component, rather, is trust and safety. So the CyberXr Coalition presented this novel approach to address security, privacy, and the ethical challenges that are incorporated within that as well. So we uncovered this, the standard outline focused on, we call a new degree of trust that went far beyond just that traditional concepts of privacy and security. It uncovered the need for literally a new mindset to focus on minimizing the abuse of data and privacy. And I'll talk about that a little bit further in a next slide. But we looked at these associated risks, whether they're intentional or unintended, that are in terms of safety, that then incorporates privacy and security while taking into account both physical and psychological harm. Now, once again, we're not saying that it's intentional, but we focused a lot in our guide on what are these unintended consequences that happen as an after effect. So as we look at assessing and addressing these social and technical biases, I wanted to give you all specifics of those that have already occurred in digital technology. So when we look at data, we know that data is king, data rules, right? Good data in, though, does create good data that is on the outside as well. So even if we look at, for instance, the recruiting industry. So I was doing my research, I came across where a new system was implemented that was rating candidates in a gender neutral way because computer models were trained to vet applicants by observing the patterns of the resumes that were submitted. But the problem was the resumes that were submitted that the data, the algorithm was looking at was over a 10-year period where most of the applicants were male. So the results were highly biased and gender neutral because of the bad data was producing a bad outcome. So even when we look at in the recruiting field, where we see that we have to bake in the very framework, diversity and inclusion, privacy and confidentiality, to make sure that we are taking into account that it is telling the accurate story. When we look at testing, ACT was flagging students' test scores, and it disclosed their confidential information to colleges on pre-admission. Well, it was stigmatizing students with that little flag that had disabilities in the admissions process. Now, once again, you get into the privacy, confidentiality arena, but we must take that into account because that was an invasion of those two components. But once again, as this data is being put in and assessed, and these unintended social and technical biases are occurring in digital technology. Let's look at the US court system. So COMPAS is an acronym for the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. Well, their algorithm was used in the US court systems to predict the likelihood that a defendant will become a recidivist. Well, the model predicted twice as many false positives for recidivism for Black offenders at 45% than white offenders at 23%. So in this particular case, we, delved into the as I mentioned before, that ethical framework of discrimination. Last but not least, because I really tried to get a rounded perspective from different areas, even in healthcare, right? They used an algorithm that was used on more than 200 million people, so a pretty fair, population was assessed in US hospitals to predict which patients would likely need extra medical attention or care, and they found that it heavily favored white patients over Black patients. And once again, this is within, as I mentioned, the 4 pillars that we talked about, focused on that ethical framework and involved discrimination. So when we talk about building our 4 pillars and across the board technology standards, we have to look at assessing and addressing the technical and social biases that unfortunately are intended consequences of that occurs in digital technology. So one thing that we like to say at the CyberXr Coalition is we are intentional on righting the wrongs that occurred, whether intentional or unintended. So we look at a values-based systems approach. Fundamentally, safe and inclusive digital experiences are based on people. Throughout this presentation, I've talked about that human-centered design, accessible for all, and considering diverse and inclusive population from the onset and ensuring that it is baked within the framework. I know that it's a process, it is ongoing, and that ongoing focus needs to be diligently addressed and assessed throughout the process, whether it's a new product, whether it's a new process, a startup or a new company, or something that's being tested even on an academic level. I also already talked about 4 pillars that are baked, that must be baked within the framework. And the guide that the CyberXr Coalition produced or launched last year is available for download, and it is open source. We were intentional in that, making sure that it is available and accessible for any and all that want to take advantage of that novel approach that we presented. You also must understand that this value-based systems approach must be practiced industry-wide. The CyberXr Coalition was very intentional with bringing in collaborators and experts from a global perspective. This is not only a US thing, it is a UK, a Britain, an Indian. It is a global perspective that must be practiced industry-wide. And this ensures consistency and awareness within the XR ecosystem. Last but not least, it is about policy building. The XR Safety Initiative, this is their primary role to interface with governments, with academia, and with various types of entities and companies and businesses to ensure safe, sound, trustworthy, fair, and ethical policies. As I mentioned before, this is a link to our immersive technology standards that, once again, we focused on 4 initial points of accessibility, inclusion, ethics, and safety. So I encourage you to download the link to engage with the CyberXr Coalition or with the XR Safety Initiative to help continue engage and help our guides and standards evolve, because it is for the entire ecosystem and for the betterment of all users and the inclusion of all users and for a diverse and robust ecosystem. Thank you for attending the presentation today. I saw that we had 2 posts in the chat, but I am available for any questions or follow-up at this time. I've listed here information to contact me at april@cyberxr.org or to follow us on our social media chats, our website, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you.
All right, thank you, April. So, and I'll open up if anybody has any questions they would like to ask April.
I'll stop sharing there.
Everybody's muted and quiet.
Oh. Well, I can report that the XR Safety Initiative is at this moment working on a new privacy standards, once again, for the entire XR ecosystem, you know, with the ransomware and global instances that excuse me, various entities are experiencing. That is really near and dear and at the forefront of what they're working on. Once again, they're taking a global approach. They are having experts from academia. Governments have even started to adopt some of our principles outlined in our first Immersive Tech Guide. So once again, we are here to serve the community, and we take it very seriously with the novel principles that we present to the ecosystem. So be looking forward for that. And as with everything that we launch, we are open to, you know, comments and open to further collaboration for the next versions that we will launch for the.
So we see about 8 members so far you have, right? On the coalitions?
Yes, and it is evolving and changing. You know, if there are new, we actually, since that presentation, the slide that I showed, we've had 2 others join us as advisors. One is the CEO of Exhibit, and Exhibit XIBIT.
Do you currently have any delivery on the standards of the guidance on the security things that already delivered?
Yes, you can go to, and I would type in the chat, xrsi.org, and that will list the XRSI has produced 2 guides, industry-wide standards. They're working on a 3rd on privacy. And then at cyberxr.org is where you can go to download our Immersive Tech standards and guidelines that focused on the 4 pillars that I addressed today. So either way, and I mean, you know, I don't know if I can announce it, but we're working with 2 governments right now. And well, I can actually say the Australian government has adopted principles that were launched in our in the CyberXr guide on the immersive technology. They have actively adopted standards that were talked about in that guide. Facebook has publicly gave us kudos as well on XRSI's and the CyberXr Coalition's work. So it has not been all in vain. And from every spectrum, from almost everywhere on the globe, people are assessing, downloading, and viewing and working with us to help further evolve what we've launched as far as industry-wide standards. So we're excited about the next iteration. I think XRSI's launch, we had to push back the launch date for the privacy standards, but they should be out within maybe 2-3 months. But you know, we'll announce that on the xrsi.org website. So stay tuned. But as I mentioned, these processes and standards, it is an ongoing labor of love. It is, but
April,
we're
I think
intention.
Jeff had a question in the chat.
Oh,
I don't know if you saw
okay.
that.
Let
Doug,
me.
looks like you got connected back.
Yes.
Jeff, have you heard of the IED Global Initiative Ethics of Extended Realities document things like privacy? Yes, I have. You know, the XRSI is proud to be a standards developing organization. So yes, we collaborate with any and everyone and entities that deal with ethics and privacy, safety, security, and all that. Yes, I mean, we pride ourselves on, as I mentioned, being a recognized SDO. So governments have come to us, entities have come to us, startups have come to us, you know, for advice and have looked at our standards for how to move forward. I'm not sure if we have worked with them, but.
Yeah, this is Doug Cohulan. One question, and unfortunately I came in late, so I wasn't able to hear the whole talk. I'll try to listen to your replay.
Sure.
But I was listening to or reading a blog from the FTC, and the title by a lawyer was make sure that your AI follows the FTC standards, Federal Trade Communication Standards, or we'll make sure you do. So how does AI, did you talk at all about AI and how that impacts following like US government standards or other standards on discrimination and other policies?
I did not touch upon that specifically. The CyberXr Coalition has not released any standards specifically related to AI. It is on our list, of course, because that's, as I mentioned, is evolving and ongoing. Mm-hmm. The XRSI will more so touch on that, being an SDO, a standards developing organization. So they will more so touch on that. I do encourage that you follow their updates that are on their website. Primarily, what we have, the way that we have addressed that is looking at the data that is driven behind that, you know, the machine learning and the AI components. We have a few AI advisors that serve on our as advisors for XRSI as well. But I'm pretty sure that they will address that in with the privacy standards as well, because it's an intersection with the data that drives AI and machine learning.
Right, and like the FDA also has a site where they talk about machine learning for medical devices, and how do you especially if you're using neural networks, how do you ensure that you're following FDA rules, likewise FTC rules. In fact, I have a friend that's a data scientist at a bank, and they can't use neural nets, machine learning, because they can't, it's not traceability of policy. And so they have to use expert systems instead in their policy making processes.
The XRSI has a component called Medical XR, and you can find their direct link on the xrsi.org page. And that is where they focus. The medical aspects, ethical and diversity and inclusion from strictly from the medical perspective. I believe they've just released a white paper about that. So I do encourage you to go to xrsi.org, click on the Medical XR page, and you'll see all that they're doing. And then they have a very robust Twitter page as well that talks about where they're going to speak. And once again, we have industry-wide experts and advisors specifically within the medical realm and the intersection with XR. So the XRSI has the CyberXr Coalition, which is the diversity and inclusion aspect. We have the Medical XR, which I just talked about. We have a child safety initiative under their umbrella as well. And we produced some great materials through that. And then what am I missing? Oh, we have Ready Hacker One, which is our communications hub. So we talk about from a journalism perspective, XR aspects as well from a global perspective. Our leader of that area is out of Italy. So we are very proud of our global perspectives that we present at all times.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Doug.
April, I'm kind of curious, as you were doing some of the examples of, the ACT and the different things, which I thought were great examples. But especially, if you're a smaller company, a startup or do it, and you're trying to use data, how do you deal with that threshold of trusting? Like, we had a presentation last night from Microsoft and HoloLens, and they use all sorts of stuff from Azure to pull in for AI, machine learning. And, I don't feel like I'd have the resources to really figure out if they have an issue with how they're doing it. I kind of have to trust them. So how do you balance that? I mean, and you would hope ACT is doing a good job, and I've heard all sorts of examples where they're not.
Right.
So, for them, I really don't trust them, but I don't know how you kind of independently verify that, what you're using is really good if someone else is producing it.
Right. Well, and hopefully you won't think this is a selfish plug, but, you have to have those moderators in place,
Right.
that can either counter or flag or, bring it to the forefront of, I think something may be occurring here. But one of the things in our guide that we talked about were like a top 10 list of, if you're doing these things, you're probably in alignment with what is right. And it's not an all in all, but, as I mentioned, our guide was created specifically to be adoption ready. So, and you invite persons like, moderating entities such as the CyberXr Coalition or the XR Safety Initiative, who are on the forefront and looking for instances. And as I mentioned throughout the presentation, some of these things are unintended consequences, and we understand that. But for those that can be prevented through moderation or through making sure that those principles are baked within the framework, then that will help, like I said, decrease mitigating factors that may occur. So it's about the collaborative effort and having the right persons, the right entities, the right set of eyes, both internally and externally, that are on board to hold everyone accountable. And then, and you look at organizations such as Microsoft or big tech, sometimes their history speaks louder than anything. So, if they've had instances in the past, and if you don't see a change, then that should be a red flag. If they have, I think it's like, for instance, Snap, used to be Snapchat, but Snap Inc. right now is taking an initiative for diversity and inclusion. So that bears within itself a heightened level of trust, because they're stepping out as the first to really look at what does diversity and inclusion or diverse and inclusive environments or experiences within Snap look like. So when you see instances like that, where they take the initiative of being a corporate, socially responsible corporation, that helps build the trust. It's not going to be overnight. As I mentioned throughout the process, it is an ongoing journey. But as you put forth the effort, that translates into trust.
Long process. As I said, there's so much stuff that's, so many biases that are baked into things we don't even think about.
Right,
So,
right.
Chin, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had another question.
Not really. My video is not working, so I can't show my video. Okay. But anyway, I'm still have a little bit of struggling on, how this organization is going to really help on the diversity, equity and inclusions with the security perspective. How this is related to the security side. I'm still struggling on that.
Well, with security, one thing you have to look at is, are the frameworks built with a security factor in mind? And when I say that, even if let's say we look at child safety, if on one end, and I'll just say big tech, I'm not going to call out a company, but if one end, one company is saying, oh, anyone can join an environment. Well, let me say, I'll use this case in point. There was a new policy put in place for this one big tech company where children can opt in to participate in a digital experience through one check. One check, I want in, there you go. So, but what are the security frameworks that are around that? What constitutes a child? Is it age? Is it level of competency? Is it level of comprehension? What constitutes a child, right? So if this new process has been implemented and all it takes is a check, then who's monitoring or who's moderating this digital experience to verify this child beyond?
Yeah, so that's it's the standards that you try to build that on access rights, and then also with the monitoring capability and control capabilities that's tied with it. Okay, because I'm from telecommunication side to think about this. You know, this is something that the services that you try to pushing out. With some kind of control access rights on, you know, you equal to everybody, you know, has the fair accessing. You don't do any kind of discriminations from the security perspective.
Right.
Right. Okay, I see what's the linkages on that. Okay.
Yeah. And so how do you mitigate those instances? You have persons that are parents. You have software developers that consider, you know, the what ifs. You know, the going kind of ding against the big tech is, you know, everyone's such in a hurry to create the next best thing that we forget there has to be a human-centric component baked within the framework. And if we miss that initial perspective or point or aspect, then that will increase the chances of having a situation where discrimination, sexism, harassment, or what have you, occurs more frequently. Throughout the presentation, I talked about if it's baked within the framework, whether that's the code of conduct, whether that's that ethical filter. If that is not baked within the framework, then yes, you will have more instances of having to go back to the table, or that iteration process, to right that wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a process. It's a process, and that is why, as I mentioned before, the CyberXr Coalition and the XRSI, the XR Safety Initiative, were very intentional with bringing on global collaborators from academia, from every end of the earth, right? To make sure that we had that overarching perspective of the what if, as we you know, came together and talked about these very issues. And as I mentioned, we went to the first four, you know, oops, sorry. Am I still there? Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. What did I do? I clicked on something, but you know, we talked about making sure that we were intentional with those four pillars, you know, accessibility, the ethics filter, diversity and inclusion, what am I missing? And trust and safety. Those are just what we started with, because we knew and saw that these were four urgent and critical perspectives, but it's far reaching. There's so many more components to consider. And if you go to the xrsi.org, you'll see their last framework that they presented, and they were, I'm going to say, 18 core focal points, but then we drilled down and really peeled back the layers of them, and we incorporated community collaborators from everywhere to join in and help expand the conversation. But the conversation is ongoing, just like tonight. We're not going to solve anything in particular, but we're going to keep these 4 pillars and, the human-centered design in the forefront of every designer, of every startup, of every developer, of every, like me in academia. We're going to keep this in the forefront because the conversation is ongoing.
Okay. Yeah, I see those things also in our company's operations. We have similar things that, diversity means you get seats to the table, right? Equity means that you are getting the resources access rights.
Yeah.
Not equality, because the equality means that everybody get the same amount of the things.
Yeah.
But not necessarily resource that everybody getting the right, the access. And inclusion means that you have the voice on the table. Everybody get a fair voice in the tables.
And so,
I see that on the security is tying to the policy and how do you implement those policies, procedures in the services access rights. And yeah. So we will monitoring this, and then we'll see, how is this progress, and yeah.
And as I mentioned before, that is why XRSI was so adamant. The XR Safety Initiative was so adamant of establishing ourselves as an SDO, Standard Developing Organization, because we know it's critical to nations. As I mentioned, the Australian government has actually adopted a lot of our principles that we launched in last year in the CyberXr Coalition standard, immersive technology standards. So we're proud of that, but that's not the end all. And it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. And I'll just end with this. A lot of times, what I really want to make clear, in addition to what I've talked about today, was, accessibility is not just getting there. Accessibility comes in a lot of different forms, whether it's gender, whether it's a disability, and I hate to say that word, but a lot of times people think about accessibility, it is a very vast term. And that's, as I mentioned, one of the things that we talk about extensively in our guide. What is accessibility? Or let's expand our initial perspective of accessibility, because it takes it in a lot of, thank you, Jeff, differently able, thank you, Jeff, that it comes in a lot of different forms as well. So we got to expand our minds, but that's a process.
It's a process.
Yeah.
Well, April, thank you so much. It was a great presentation. Enjoyed
yes,
the conversation.
Thank you.
It was almost not even QA. It was much more of a conversation about it afterwards. So it was very enjoyable. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. As we said, tomorrow we have a full slate. We actually have 3 more sessions. We have one on using Unreal engines, one on using Vuforia, and then Intel is doing a presentation on their RealSense cameras. So hopefully you'll be able to join us, and then all of these sessions will be available during the hackathon this weekend. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the night.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Jim.